What if the greatest mysteries of our world aren't hidden, but simply ignored? It begins as a whisper, a low rumble in the night. Not everyone hears it, only a few, and for them, it's unbearable. It hums like a distant engine idling, vibrating through the walls, through the bones. This sound, real, measurable, persistent, has driven some to the edge of madness. Yet science remains silent. Known as the hum, this phenomenon has been documented in over 100 locations worldwide: Bristol, Taos, Windsor, Bondi. Only around 2% of the population hears it, but where it exists, the pattern is uncannily consistent. A low-frequency drone, loudest indoors, at night, impossible to escape. Some sufferers move homes, others leave cities. A few fall into despair. In 2012, researchers recorded the hum using sensitive equipment. Agencies confirmed acoustic anomalies. The sound was not imagined. It could be heard, captured, analyzed, and yet its origin remained a mystery. Theories sprang up: industrial machinery, geological vibrations, electromagnetic interference, military communications. None conclusive. But here's the twist. When one team neared an answer, identifying a likely industrial source, the investigation was abruptly shut down. Their data classified, their notes destroyed. Researchers warned, witnesses dismissed as mentally unstable. Universities turned away proposals to study the hum. Journals rejected peer-reviewed papers. Conferences canceled talks. Some scientists reported strange interference, corrupted files, malfunctioning instruments, and in one chilling case, a visit from officials who advised them to walk away. Yet the hum has not gone away. In new towns, new homes, it reemerges. The same frequency, the same symptoms. A worldwide enigma, actively experienced, repeatedly recorded, but systematically denied. Why? This is not just a story of unexplained sound. It's a story of boundaries between what is heard and what is acknowledged, what is known and what is allowed to be known. It asks, when evidence exists, why does science refuse to see it? What happens when reality doesn't fit the model and is therefore erased? This is the first of many questions. Because the hum is only the beginning, there are places on this planet and beyond where the unexplained refuses to disappear. Lights that dance with intent, signals that echo from the stars, fire that burns from within, forces that defy the laws we thought unbreakable, and behind them all, silence. In the chapters ahead, we'll follow 10 of the most rigorously documented, persistently denied, and profoundly mysterious phenomena of our time. Each has been witnessed, measured, and investigated. Each has, at some point, crossed the threshold of accepted science, only to be turned away. We will not sensationalize. We will not leap to conclusions. But we will ask, what does it mean when knowledge is not lost, but refused? And who decides what questions are allowed to be answered? This is a journey through silence, not the absence of sound, but the quiet wall that rises when science meets uncertainty. Where the curious are told to stop asking, where data disappears, where possibility becomes taboo. This is not about belief, it's about attention and the cost of looking away. We begin not with the stars or the sea, but with the low and endless hum, vibrating just beyond the reach of consensus. A sound too real to be imagined, and too inconvenient to be believed. One mystery, one silence, one question. If truth makes noise, why is no one listening? It starts with light. In the stillness of a remote Norwegian valley, a glow pierces the dark. No thunderclap, no flash, just a floating orb, shifting colors in the cold air, white, then gold, then blood red. It hovers, waits, then splits into two, and vanishes. For over a century, the people of Hessdalen have seen these lights. Farmers, hikers, scientists. At first, they were dismissed as folklore, atmospheric illusions, tricks of perception. But then came the cameras, the radars, the instruments. The lights did not disappear. They posed. By the 1980s, sightings surged. The lights were appearing up to 20 times a week, moving in ways no known object could. Researchers responded with equipment, magnetometers, spectrum analyzers, high-speed cameras. What they recorded defied belief. Objects moving at thousands of meters per second, changing direction instantly, emitting electromagnetic pulses and heat, sometimes appearing to respond to human presence. And yet, no serious scientific effort followed. A permanent observation station, established in 1998, has recorded thousands of incidents. The data is consistent. Multiple sensors detect the same event. No one questions the reality of the lights, but they remain unexplained, and more importantly, unstudied. Papers written about Hessdalen are rarely accepted by major journals. Conferences avoid the topic. Funding applications are quietly rejected. One research team, after submitting a proposal backed by multiple universities and decades of empirical data, was met not with support, but with silence. Their lead investigator was later investigated for misuse of academic time. And still, the lights return. They hover over snowy hillsides. They follow cars. They drift beside researchers who wave at them and drift away. They are not hidden. They are not subtle. They are simply not welcomed into the story science is willing to tell. Why? Because Hessdalen offers more than a mystery. It offers contradiction, movement without propulsion, energy without source, apparent interaction without origin. These lights do not just defy explanation, they defy categorization. Are they atmospheric, artificial, conscious? The lights do not answer, but they remain, and that, perhaps, is what makes them so disruptive. We are trained to see unexplained events as gaps in understanding, anomalies soon to be filled. But what if some mysteries are not transitional? What if they are persistent? Hessdalen asks this: what happens when the unexplained does not resolve, but endures? When we can measure the mystery, but not define it? When we see, but cannot say? There is no dogma in the valley, only cameras, only data, and a light that waits, sometimes for hours, sometimes for decades, to be witnessed again. In the silence of snow, under the aurora's shifting curtain, it hovers still, seen, measured, ignored. What does it mean when reality appears, and we look away? What else might be flickering at the edge of perception, patiently waiting to be believed? It came from the deep. In 1997, an underwater microphone array in the South Pacific picked up something extraordinary. A sound, deep and resonant, so powerful it was heard across a span of over 5,000 kilometers. It rose in pitch like the moan of some leviathan awakening. Analysts gave it a name: the Bloop. At first, it was just noise, until they listened closer. The Bloop wasn't like earthquakes or volcanic activity. It didn't match ice movement or underwater landslides. It had a biological profile. That meant it wasn't random. It was alive. Possibly. But if it was, the creature making it would have to be enormous, far larger than a blue whale, the largest animal known to have ever lived. Here was a sound, recorded by government hydrophones designed to detect nuclear submarines, behaving like an animal cry from something no one had seen. Then the silence began. Initial government reports acknowledged the Bloop's biological markers. Teams prepared to investigate. But by 2005, the story changed. The sound, officials said, was caused by an ice quake, glaciers cracking far away. only it didn't match the location, or the frequency, or the pattern. And the original high-resolution recordings? Reclassified. Researchers who had worked on the data lost access. Some of their work disappeared altogether. The Bloop wasn't alone. Over the years, that same underwater array captured dozens of similar ultra-low-frequency anomalies. Most were never published. Some briefly appeared in academic circles, only to vanish behind closed doors. Why? The oceans cover more than 70% of Earth's surface. They are less mapped than the surface of Mars. Within that abyssal dark lie ecosystems we've never touched, and perhaps organisms we've never imagined. If the Bloop came from a living source, it suggests something staggering, that a creature the size of a skyscraper could move through our oceans, mostly unnoticed, not extinct, not mythical, just unknown. This isn't fantasy. It was recorded, it was triangulated, and it was nearly acknowledged, until it wasn't. Why would a sound, if unexplained, be a threat? Because some truths don't just expand the world, they unsettle it. They demand we redraw boundaries we thought were permanent, of scale, of presence, of control. The Bloop's echo may have lasted only a minute, but it rang through the walls of certainty, asking us to listen to what we're not supposed to hear. And what if that question has been asked before? By sailors who spoke of sea monsters, by myths of beings rising from the depths. Dismissed as legends, until the microphone said otherwise. The ocean, for all our satellite maps and deep-sea drones, remains a realm of mystery. But some mysteries make noise, and still the official story holds. It was ice. The Bloop was just ice. Even when the data says otherwise, even when the silence that followed is louder than the sound itself. So ask yourself, when evidence is heard and then silenced, what else have we recorded, only to unremember? And what else is still out there, calling from below? It arrived in a burst. A single spike of radio energy lasting just milliseconds and traveling across billions of light years. When astronomers first noticed the signal buried in archived data from 2001, they didn't know what they were looking at. By 2007, the phenomenon had a name: fast radio bursts, or FRBs. But what they really were, that was harder to explain. These bursts were brief, yes, but potent. Each one carried as much energy as our sun produces in an entire day. And they came from nowhere. No nearby stars, no black holes, no known natural engine that could generate something so concentrated and fast. Then the patterns emerged. FRBs weren't just random noise. Some repeated, coming from the same coordinates, spaced irregularly but unmistakably returning. Others carried signatures, modulations that looked suspiciously like information. The signals even seemed to echo each other, suggesting they'd passed through identical regions of space across unfathomable distances and still arrived coherent and intact. Natural explanations faltered. No known cosmic process could account for the consistency, the precision, or the repetition. Theories were proposed: neutron stars colliding, magnetic fields snapping, but nothing quite fit. And then one signal stood apart. In 2018, an FRB was captured that didn't just burst. It sang. A complex modulation pattern rippled through it, lasting almost a full second. It repeated itself. 3 independent teams analyzed it. All concluded this was not a natural event. None of their papers were published. Instead, research grants evaporated. Telescopes previously devoted to tracking FRBs were repurposed. Observatories that had focused on the phenomenon found their funding redirected. The official narrative shifted. FRBs were declared interesting but irrelevant, quirks of the cosmos, nothing more. But the signals kept coming. Thousands of FRBs have now been recorded, some from entirely new galaxies. some looping back to the same mysterious points in space. All of them, according to official science, are still unexplained and largely ignored. What if we're wrong? What if, somewhere in that cosmic chatter, a message waits? And what if we once heard it and turned away? We often imagine first contact as something dramatic, a spaceship landing, a message beamed directly to Earth. But maybe it wouldn't look like that. Maybe it would be data, a pattern, a signal so foreign it would take years just to notice, let alone understand. Maybe we did. And maybe that's the real discomfort. Not that we're alone, but that we're not ready not to be. Science is supposed to follow evidence. But when the evidence suggests intelligence, and not ours, the rules seem to change. So we archive, we reclassify, we call it noise, and the sky keeps pulsing. What are we missing when we dismiss the unfamiliar? What truths lie encoded in silence and in the bursts between? Fire is supposed to spread. It consumes what it touches, radiates heat outward, leaves behind patterns investigators can read like a story. Fire behaves according to rules, predictable, brutal, well understood. And yet, scattered through history are cases where fire seems to forget those rules entirely. A body reduced almost completely to ash, bones calcined, organs destroyed. But the room remains intact, curtains untouched, furniture barely scorched. Sometimes a single limb survives, a foot, a leg below the knee, while the rest is gone. This is what investigators call spontaneous human combustion. The phrase itself invites skepticism. It sounds medieval, absurd, sensational, and for that reason alone, it is often dismissed. But behind the label are real cases, documented by fire departments, coroners, and forensic experts. People trained to doubt first and accept last. The problem is that the evidence refuses to cooperate. Human bodies do not burn easily. They are mostly water. Even in crematoriums, complete incineration requires sustained temperatures above 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit for hours. Yet in these cases, bodies burn almost entirely in enclosed spaces without igniting their surroundings. In 1951, a woman was found in her apartment. Her body was reduced to ash where she sat. The chair remained. The walls showed damage only at seated height. No accelerants, no external fire source. In 1982, firefighters watched blue flames flicker inside a locked kitchen. They felt no heat through the door. When they broke in, the woman inside was almost completely consumed, while nearby objects remained unburned. The physics doesn't work. The most common explanation offered is the wick effect, where clothing acts as a wick and body fat as fuel. But experimental attempts to recreate this fail to match the real cases. The burns take too long. They produce smoke. They spread. They do not generate the extreme, localized heat required to reduce bone to ash while sparing furniture inches away. And witnesses describe something stranger still: flames that do not spread, heat that does not radiate, fires that seem contained, inward, not outward. Some describe blue or yellow light flickering unnaturally. Others report a sudden absence of heat beyond a small radius, as if the fire were folded in on itself. Medical examiners have noted internal burning patterns, organs damaged from the inside. But no known chemical process in the human body can generate that level of sustained heat. So the cases are filed away, labeled anomalies, rare curiosities, not worth systematic study. And yet they keep happening. Fire science departments avoid the topic. Research proposals are rejected. Textbooks mention it only in passing, if at all. The phenomenon exists in official records, but not in official conversations. Why? Because spontaneous human combustion doesn't just challenge a theory. It challenges a certainty. It suggests there may be conditions, rare, extreme, poorly understood, where the human body interacts with energy in ways we have not yet mapped. And that idea is deeply unsettling. We prefer fires we can explain, causes we can name, accidents we can prevent. But what do we do with a fire that starts nowhere we can see and ends without spreading? What do we do when the evidence is real, but the explanation is missing? Perhaps the question is not whether spontaneous human combustion exists. Perhaps the question is why we are so eager to look away. And if fire can behave differently than we expect, what else might we be misunderstanding about the nature of energy, matter, and ourselves? A storm gathers, but there's no thunder. Instead, a glowing sphere drifts silently through the air. It hovers above a field, slips through an open window, then vanishes with a soft crackle. No smoke, no scorch, just the memory of something that should not be. This is ball lightning. For centuries, it's appeared in eyewitness accounts. Luminous orbs the size of apples or basketballs, drifting indoors, floating over rivers, passing through walls, exploding without warning. Sometimes they hum, sometimes they hiss, sometimes they just are. Pilots have reported them at altitude. Soldiers have watched them roll across trenches. Scientists, meteorologists, and engineers, people trained to measure reality, have seen them firsthand. They're not myths. They've been photographed, captured on video, even recreated in laboratories under specific conditions. In 2006, Chinese researchers generated glowing plasma spheres using electrodes, mimicking natural sightings. In 2012, they captured a spectral signature of actual ball lightning in the wild, matching the lab results. Science had what it needed: observation, replication, data. And yet, the silence returned. No major research program followed. No surge of interest. The findings were quietly acknowledged, then shelved. The phenomenon remains officially unexplained, pushed to the margins of physics where it can't disrupt. Why? Because ball lightning breaks rules. Plasma, ionized gas, should dissipate quickly in air. It shouldn't maintain shape. It shouldn't move coherently, pass through matter, or last more than a fraction of a second. And yet ball lightning can persist for minutes. It can travel. It can change direction. Sometimes it even appears to respond. There's a deeper discomfort too: potential. If we could understand how ball lightning forms, how that energy stabilizes, it could revolutionize everything from propulsion systems to energy storage to advanced weapons. And historically, others have noticed. Declassified military documents from the Cold War show that research into ball lightning wasn't just scientific. It was strategic. Programs were launched, then classified. Equipment disappeared. Reports stopped. Today, physics textbooks mention ball lightning as a curiosity. Something seen but not studied. Real but not welcome. And so the orbs keep drifting. They pass through barns in the countryside. They hover over highways. They slip quietly between dimensions of known and unknown, an ancient mystery in the age of precision. They are not illusions. They are not hallucinations. They are what happens when nature doesn't ask for permission. So what are we afraid of? Is it the energy, the unpredictability, or the possibility that something so strange can exist openly in our world, visible, repeatable, and still remain outside our grasp? Ball lightning does not burn the world down. It floats through it, gentle, defiant, inexplicable, a flicker in the storm, a question in the shape of light. And maybe that's the real reason we look away, because in that glowing sphere is a reminder. Not everything we see fits inside the models we've made, and some lights cannot be explained, only followed. In the stillness of the Florida heat, surrounded by swaying palms and silent roads, stands a monument carved from mystery. Massive blocks of coral rock, some weighing over 30 tons, balanced, interlocked, and aligned with uncanny precision. Obelisks rise, gates pivot on invisible axes. Each stone whispers the same question: how? This is the Coral Castle, built over nearly 3 decades by a single man, Edward Hutchison, 5 feet tall, 100 pounds. The structure defies logic. He worked alone, at night, without witnesses. No cranes, no motors, just hand tools, pulleys, and a secret. He said he had discovered the ancient methods of the Egyptians, that he knew how the pyramids were built. Neighbors recalled hearing strange humming during construction, but never saw how he moved the stones. What remains is not just heavy, it's delicate. A 9-ton stone gate balanced so perfectly it once turned with the push of a finger. Walls constructed without mortar, yet sealed so tightly that light does not pass between the stones. Some pieces are interlocked with such complexity that modern engineers admit replicating this today would be difficult, even with advanced machinery. After Hutchison's death in 1951, investigators examined his tools: basic chains, a flywheel, tripods, none capable of explaining the feat. A journal rumored to contain his methods was never found. And so the structure stands, visited, photographed, marveled at, but not studied. Engineering societies dismiss it as eccentric folk art. Archaeologists ignore it entirely. No major scientific effort has been mounted to reverse engineer the techniques. Proposals for research are quietly declined. The mystery remains frozen in time, a roadside riddle hiding in plain sight. Why? Because Coral Castle is more than an architectural anomaly. It's a wound in the narrative of progress, a reminder that one man, using forgotten knowledge or unacknowledged skill, may have accomplished something that modern science cannot easily explain. And that's inconvenient. If Hutchison truly discovered a principle, some interplay of magnetism, gravity, resonance, that allowed him to move multi-ton stones alone, it means we've missed something fundamental. If he didn't, then he possessed a level of mechanical genius beyond anything recognized in his lifetime. Either way, the silence is telling. Imagine if the site were discovered today without context. Perfectly balanced gates, stones suspended without mortar. Theories would abound, studies would be commissioned, grants approved. But because it already exists, because it was built outside the institutions, it remains unexamined. Perhaps that is the real discomfort. That truth, when it comes from the fringes, is harder to see. So Coral Castle waits, its stones unmoving, its secrets intact. The gate no longer turns, its bearings failed in the 1980s, and modern engineers struggled to restore what one man once achieved alone. A mystery carved in coral, a monument not to lost knowledge, but to ignored knowledge. What else have we walked past, marveled at, photographed, and forgotten to ask how? And what if the answers we seek are not hidden underground, but sitting in sunlight, asking quietly to be understood? It began with a sound that had no source. In 1979, deep in a Canadian laboratory filled with Tesla coils and high-voltage equipment, an experimenter noticed something strange. A piece of metal lifted off a table, on its own. Other objects began to move, twist, rise. Wood shattered without impact, metal fused with metal, and with wood all without heat. He had not meant to discover anything, but he had. This was the beginning of what became known, unofficially, as the Hutchison effect. John Hutchison was an inventor, a tinkerer obsessed with electromagnetic fields. His laboratory, a chaotic tangle of wires and coils, began to produce effects that no physics textbook could explain. Levitation, cold fusion, spontaneous metal deformation, objects merging at room temperature. The events were captured on camera, witnessed by engineers, military personnel, and journalists alike. What followed was not acclaim, but erasure. Multiple visits by military officials, equipment confiscated, sometimes returned inoperable, surveillance, interference. Replication attempts at universities mysteriously sabotaged, components went missing, devices malfunctioned, funding was pulled. Mainstream science called it a hoax. And yet the videos remain. Multiple angles, clear anomalies, effects happening in real time with no visible mechanisms. And the fused materials, analyzed under microscopes, showed crystal structures that shouldn't exist without extreme pressure and heat. Still, no scientific journal would touch it. Researchers who showed interest were advised quietly to walk away. Why? Because the Hutchison effect didn't just raise questions. It challenged foundations. If objects can levitate under specific electromagnetic conditions, if dissimilar materials can fuse at ambient temperatures, then our understanding of matter, energy, and the very laws of thermodynamics comes into question. And that is not a question institutions are prepared to entertain. Skeptics argued it was trickery, that the effects could be faked. But faked repeatedly? Under observation? With physical samples displaying impossible characteristics. And if it was a fraud, why the government interest? Why the quiet raids? Why the classified inquiries? The more the effect was demonstrated, the more it was discredited, not through evidence, but through silence. The man behind it, Hutchison, faded from the headlines. Labeled eccentric, marginalized, stripped of credibility. Not because he lacked data, but because his data didn't fit. And so the effect, real or not, remains in limbo, unclaimed, unverified, untouched. A door briefly opened on a new frontier of physics, and then quietly sealed shut. We may never know whether Hutchison stumbled upon a true anomaly or a misunderstood mechanism. But the response tells us something more troubling than the mystery itself. That sometimes what we are allowed to explore is determined not by evidence, but by permission. And what happens when discovery falls outside the bounds of acceptability? It vanishes. Just like the objects that once floated in that cluttered lab, suspended against gravity and against belief. Not because it's impossible, but because we weren't ready to say it wasn't. At the bottom of the Baltic Sea, something waits. In 2011, a sonar scan during a routine dive revealed a shape unlike any natural formation. Perfectly circular, nearly 200 feet across, with edges, right angles, and what appeared to be a staircase etched into stone. Some thought it was a rock outcropping, others a sunken vessel, but the image was clear, too geometric, too precise. It looked built. Divers descended. What they found deepened the mystery. The structure rested at the end of a long sea-floor trail, as if it had slid or been dragged. The surface was unnaturally smooth. Some areas looked carved. Samples brought to the surface revealed minerals not commonly found in the region, and in some cases not found in nature at all. Then the electronics failed. Cameras shut down. Satellite phones died. Instruments glitched near the site, but functioned perfectly away from it. The electromagnetic interference was real, measurable, and inexplicable. Geologists were quick to offer natural explanations. Glacial deposits, volcanic formations, perhaps a pile of rocks shaped by chance. But none of those accounted for the symmetry, the metallic traces, or the strange electronic disruption. And then the research stopped. Funding evaporated. Permits were denied. Expeditions blocked by bureaucratic barriers. Universities refused to get involved. A major sponsor reported receiving pressure not to pursue the study. The anomaly remained. But the questions disappeared. Why? Because the implications are too large. If the Baltic Sea anomaly is artificial, if it was made, not formed, then it reopens every buried narrative. Ancient civilizations, lost histories, technologies unrecorded. It challenges our linear story of progress and our assumption that we've seen all there is to see beneath the waves. And if it's not artificial, then why the interference? Why the trace metals? Why the refusal to look closer? The easiest way to dismiss a mystery is to study it thoroughly and explain it away. But the anomaly has not been studied, not seriously. It has been denied that privilege. Instead, it lies beneath the waves, marked by its shape and silence. Tourists know of it. Conspiracy forums debate it. But the institutions that define what is worthy of knowledge have moved on, not because the mystery was solved, but because it wasn't allowed to grow. The sea once again holds its secrets, not because we cannot dive, but because we choose not to. What lies beneath may be inconvenient, it may be disruptive, or it may be extraordinary. But until we ask the question fully, we will never know. And the Baltic will remain a graveyard not just of ships, but of possibilities. What is more unsettling? That we don't know what it is? Or that we're not supposed to ask? It was a signal no one expected. August 15, 1977. The Big Ear radio telescope in Ohio was scanning the skies when it caught something remarkable. A 72-second burst of narrowband radio energy, strong, focused, and precisely on the hydrogen line frequency. The astronomer monitoring the data, Jerry Eamon, circled the printout and scribbled one word in the margin: "Wow." The name stuck. The explanation never came. The wow signal was everything scientists had predicted an extraterrestrial transmission might look like. It came from deep space, not from Earth, not from any known satellite. Its intensity rose and fell exactly as a signal would when passing through the telescope's field of view with Earth's rotation, and it hit the universal channel, 1420 MHz, the natural frequency of hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe. A logical choice for interstellar communication. But then, nothing. No repeat. No echo. Just 72 seconds, then silence. The telescope returned to the same spot many times. Other observatories joined the search. All heard only the hum of the cosmos. The signal had vanished. In the years that followed, explanations were proposed and discarded. Satellites? None matched the trajectory. Comets? Unlikely, given the frequency precision. Interference? It didn't fit. Eventually, in the absence of answers, interest waned. Funding moved elsewhere. The Big Ear telescope was dismantled in 1997, turned into a golf course. Then, in 2017, a claim emerged. The signal was caused by a passing comet. The media quickly declared the mystery solved. But scientists pointed out the flaws. Comets do not emit signals at that strength, with that narrow frequency, or that duration. Still, the explanation stuck, not because it was proven, but because it was convenient. And so the most compelling candidate for alien communication ever detected was quietly filed away. Why? Because the implications were too immense. A confirmed extraterrestrial signal wouldn't just change astronomy. It would rewrite philosophy, religion, geopolitics. It would force us to ask who we are, what we are, and whether we are still alone. And the wow signal came too close, too clear, too perfect, too much. In the decades since, thousands of radio signals have been recorded, some natural, some unexplained, but none quite like that one, singular whisper across the stars, never repeated, never confirmed, never pursued, with the vigor it deserved. The sky hasn't stopped speaking, but we stopped listening. The wow signal still exists, not just in archives, but in the unasked questions it left behind. What if it was real? What if someone, somewhere, aimed a beacon across the light years? And we turned away? Not because we couldn't respond, but because we were afraid to hear it again. In the silence that followed, one truth remains. Contact may not come with fanfare or clarity. It may come once, it may come faintly, and it may already have come. What matters is whether we choose to remember and to listen again, because the universe is still broadcasting, and not every message waits for a reply. It hums, they said, not from outside, but from everywhere. A low, vibrating drone, persistent and inescapable. In Bristol, England, it started in the 1960s. Since then, the same sound has been reported across the globe. Taos, New Mexico, Windsor, Ontario, Largs, Scotland. Dozens of cities, thousands of ears, and yet it doesn't exist. At least, according to most scientific institutions. The hum is real to those who hear it, about 2% of people in affected areas. They describe it as a distant diesel engine pulsing between 30 and 80 hertz, loudest indoors and at night. It disrupts sleep, concentration, sanity. Some sufferers move away, some fall ill. A few, tragically, take their lives. But here's where it stops being just a mystery and becomes something stranger. The hum has been recorded, detected by sensitive microphones, registered on seismographs, verified by acoustic engineers. It's measurable. It's reproducible. And yet every serious scientific attempt to study it hits a wall. In 2003, a government-contracted team confirmed the phenomenon in one region and began tracing its source. Before they could finish, the project was shut down. The data was classified. The team was ordered to destroy their notes. Universities refuse research proposals, even with private funding. Journal articles on the hum are routinely rejected. Conference presentations canceled. Scientists who persist report interference, equipment failure, corrupted files, anonymous warnings. Why? Some theories suggest low-frequency industrial noise, pipelines, power plants. Others propose microseismic tremors or electromagnetic interactions with the auditory system. And then there are darker ideas: military transmissions, psychological warfare, undisclosed technology. But the deeper question is not what causes the hum, it's why no one will study it. Thousands of people, dozens of locations, consistent acoustic characteristics, equipment-based verification, and yet institutional silence. Witnesses are often treated as psychiatric cases, their concerns dismissed, their health struggles ignored, but the evidence suggests otherwise. The hum stops when they leave the area. It's heard by multiple people simultaneously. It's captured on machine. So what's being protected? Is it scientific orthodoxy, unwilling to accept a mystery without a known mechanism? Is it industrial secrecy, too many interests threatened by the truth? Or is it something else entirely? The hum exists at the intersection of perception and measurement. It's heard and recorded, but not believed. Real but unacknowledged. And that makes it more than an anomaly. It becomes a mirror, reflecting how we treat the uncomfortable, the persistent, the uninvited data that refuses to go away. And in that silence, deeper than the sound itself, is a lesson about the boundaries of attention. Because sometimes what's denied isn't just a phenomenon. It's the people who experience it. The hum doesn't scream. It doesn't flash. It doesn't explode. It just never stops. And maybe that's why it's so easy and so dangerous to ignore. What else might we be hearing all this time without permission to understand? They drift above the valley like fireflies made of plasma. No engines, no wings, just light, pulsing, hovering, splitting, rejoining. The Hessdalen Lights appear without warning in a quiet corner of Norway in a sky unburdened by industry or aircraft. They've been seen for over a century, filmed thousands of times, tracked by radar, measured by magnetometers, monitored continuously for decades. And still, science looks away. In the early 1980s, the lights became almost nightly visitors. They'd hover over ridgelines, glide silently across roads, sometimes trailing vehicles. Local residents were joined by researchers who installed permanent monitoring equipment in 1998. The data it collected was clear, consistent, and confounding. Some lights accelerated faster than any known aircraft. Others changed direction mid-flight without inertia. Some emitted strong electromagnetic fields. In one case, electronic devices shut down. A watch stopped, then resumed when the light vanished. Even stranger, the lights seemed aware. Witnesses waved, and the lights approached. Cars stopped, and the lights hovered. Scientists arrived at observation posts, and the lights appeared within minutes. It was as if somehow they noticed. Despite the empirical data, despite radar returns, spectral analysis, and visual confirmation, mainstream journals refused to publish the findings. Proposals to study Hessdalen were denied funding. One research lead was even investigated by his university for pursuing the project too aggressively. Yet the lights continue. They don't demand attention. They simply persist. Their behavior is not random, but patterned, not chaotic, but deliberate. They challenge our notions of what nature, or technology, is allowed to do. Are they natural phenomena, unknown atmospheric plasma, or are they something else, unmapped, uninvited, and uninterested in being explained? Science often dismisses what it can't predict. But Hessdalen isn't unpredictable. It's just inconvenient. It offers proof without precedent, consistency without cause. And so it is ignored. This is not a ghost story. It is a data set, a controlled, measured, and observable phenomenon that breaks the rules we've written. Not because the universe is lying, but because our understanding is incomplete. The valley remains. So do the instruments, the watchers, the questions. But the institutions that shape what we accept as real have turned away, not because Hessdalen lacks evidence, but because it offers too much light, too much anomaly, too much challenge to the narrative of certainty. What if the lights are not an exception, but a glimpse? What if the world is stranger, subtler, more interactive than we admit? And what else might be waiting in other valleys, unmeasured, simply because we have not been willing to see? The lights do not speak. But they are saying something. And the longer we ignore them, the more we reveal, not about them, but about us. A man sits quietly, surrounded by stone. He is slight, barely 5 feet tall, but the coral blocks around him weigh more than cars. Alone, at night, and without help, he moves them, lifts them, balances them with such precision that they pivot with a finger's touch. This isn't a myth. It's Coral Castle, again. And behind its mystery is a repeating pattern, not just in one place or one time, but across disciplines, continents, and eras. Because these 10 stories, from the hum to the wow signal, are not isolated oddities. They are part of something larger, a constellation of unanswered questions that science has chosen not to pursue. Each case holds the same core ingredients: repeated observation, measurable data, credible witnesses, physical evidence, and still institutional rejection. In the best cases, we get polite disinterest. In the worst, we see active suppression, defunded projects, confiscated data, discredited researchers. Why? It's tempting to leap to conclusions, to imagine cover-ups and conspiracies. But the truth may be simpler and more unsettling. Science, like any system, is made of people, and people fear risk. The risk of being wrong, the risk of ridicule, the risk of challenging the very framework they were trained to defend. So the unknown becomes uncomfortable, the anomalous becomes unacceptable, and the unexplained becomes invisible. But reality does not care about comfort. It does not conform to grant proposals, peer review policies, or institutional hierarchies. It simply is. The hum continues to drone beneath our cities. The lights still dance above Hessdalen. The bloop echoes from the abyss. Radio bursts arrive from galaxies far beyond our reach. And yet, the response remains the same. Ignore, minimize, forget. But we must ask, what is the cost? What discoveries have been lost in the noise? What insights have been buried beneath fear, pride, or bureaucracy? The stories we've explored are not just about strange phenomena. They are about thresholds, moments when we glimpse something that doesn't fit and must choose. Do we investigate or do we look away? Every great leap in science began with such a moment. But not every moment is seized. Some are shelved, some are suppressed. Some are ridiculed until they vanish. And some, like the coral stones balanced in the Florida sun, are simply left to stand as silent reminders of what we choose not to understand. These stories speak softly, but urgently. They remind us that truth is not a destination. It is a direction. And sometimes the path is found not in what we know, but in what we dare to wonder. What else waits in that silence? And who will listen next? The unknown is not empty. It is not a void, not a blank space at the end of the map. It is filled with questions, patterns, voices, echoes, with lights that hover in Norwegian skies, sounds that rumble from nowhere, signals that may have crossed galaxies just to reach us. We began this journey with a hum, a subtle vibration that some can hear and others cannot. It led us through valleys of dancing light, beneath oceans that conceal titanic voices, and into the still silence of laboratories where gravity failed and materials fused against all known laws. We saw radio bursts too sharp to be accidents, bodies burned in ways that fire cannot explain, and structures built by hands that history forgot. But this story is not about the paranormal. It's about perception. It's about where we choose to look and where we choose to look away. Each of these phenomena shares a quiet defiance. They were observed, measured, recorded. They were real by any reasonable standard of science. And yet they remain cast out, orphaned by the very institutions that claim to welcome truth above all. Why? Because science, for all its power, is still shaped by story. And stories have rules. They reward what can be replicated, contained, categorized. They punish what resists easy explanation. They favor the expected, the aligned, the fundable. And so when reality offers something that challenges not just a theory, but a worldview, the response is often not curiosity, but silence. And yet the silence speaks. It tells us about the limits of our intellectual courage. It warns us of the price we pay when we abandon mystery for convenience. It shows us that suppression does not always come in the form of censorship. Sometimes it arrives as indifference. But indifference is a choice, and so is wonder. To wonder is to lean in, to listen to the hum rather than dismiss it, to ask why the signal came only once, to admit we do not know, and to let that not knowing guide us forward, not backward. The world is not short on mystery. It is short on permission. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all, not what lies hidden, but what we have hidden from ourselves. These 14 chapters are not answers. They are invitations to reopen old files, to revisit neglected valleys, to reframe the unexplained not as failure, but as frontier. Because the unknown is not a wall, it is a mirror. And what we find there depends on whether we dare to look. So ask yourself, what truth might live just beyond belief? And what silence are you still willing to hear? The mysteries remain. The lights still glow. The signal is still out there, waiting perhaps for someone not just to receive, but to respond.